Have you ever noticed how one rugby nation keeps getting blamed for taking over the Northern Hemisphere game? Every time a Springbok appears in a European club jersey, the accusations start flying. South Africa is invading Europe. South Africa is draining talent. South Africa is dominating every league it touches. But what if everything we've been told is wrong? What if the country accused of exporting players everywhere is actually one of the most home-based rugby nations on earth? And what if the real talent drain in world rugby is happening somewhere else entirely, while almost nobody is talking about it? Because when the numbers are finally counted properly, a shocking truth emerges. The biggest threat to rugby's competitive balance may not be South Africa at all. And the evidence completely changes the conversation. For years, South African rugby supporters have listened to the same criticism. According to many fans in the Northern Hemisphere, South Africa has transformed the United Rugby Championship into its own competition. The narrative sounds convincing. The Bulls, the Sharks, the Stormers, and the Lions joined the competition. Springbok stars seem to appear everywhere. South African teams keep challenging for trophies. South African players continue attracting attention across Europe. Case closed, right? Not quite. Because the moment we look beyond the headlines and examine the numbers, the story starts to fall apart. One statistic is often used as proof of South African dominance. There are hundreds of South Africans in the URC. At first glance, that sounds dramatic. Until you remember something very obvious. The Bulls play in Pretoria. The Lions play in Johannesburg. The Sharks play in Durban. The Stormers play in Cape Town. Of course, those teams are filled with South Africans. They're South African franchises. Counting those players as evidence of a foreign invasion makes about as much sense as accusing an English club of having too many English players. The logic simply doesn't hold. And once those four franchises are removed from the equation, the picture changes dramatically. Suddenly, the supposed takeover becomes remarkably small. Across the English Premiership and France's top 14, there are only a relatively limited number of South African-born players. In competitions containing well over 1,000 squad positions, South Africa's footprint becomes far smaller than many people imagine. The nation constantly portrayed as rugby's great exporter turns out to be keeping most of its talent at home. That fact alone challenges years of assumptions. But the surprises don't stop there. Perhaps the strongest evidence comes from one of the biggest transfers in recent rugby memory. Instead of another Springbok heading north for a lucrative contract, a major player decided to go in the opposite direction. Thomas du Toit left English champions Bath and returned to the Sharks. Think about that for a moment. An established international player walked away from one of England's most successful clubs to return home. His reasoning was simple. His future was in South Africa. His family life was in South Africa. His long-term plans were in South Africa. That decision tells us something important. South African rugby isn't just exporting talent. It's still attracting talent back. And that is not something struggling rugby systems typically achieve. If South Africa were truly being emptied of its best players, moves like Thomas du Toit's would be far less common. Instead, the connection between South African players and home remains incredibly strong. Yet while critics focus intensely on every Springbok signing, another story has been developing almost unnoticed. A story that may be far more significant. Take a closer look at English rugby. Many people describe the Premiership as overflowing with foreign players. But the numbers tell a different story. The majority of players competing in the league were born in England. English rugby remains overwhelmingly English. That reality often gets lost amid discussions about international recruitment. Yet it raises an interesting question. If South Africans aren't dominating the player pool, then who is the largest external contributor? The answer surprises many rugby fans. It's Wales. Quietly, consistently, and in growing numbers. While debates rage about South African influence, Welsh players have been crossing into England in significant numbers. Not because they want to abandon Welsh rugby. Not because they lack loyalty. But because professional opportunities increasingly exist elsewhere. The economic realities are difficult to ignore. Players want stability. Players want competitive contracts. Players want secure futures. And many Welsh professionals have found those opportunities across the bridge. This is where the conversation becomes much more serious. Because unlike South Africa, Wales faces a very different challenge. The concern isn't about players arriving. The concern is about players leaving. Every player who departs represents experience. Every departure weakens local depth. Every departure makes it harder for regional teams to build continuity. Over time, the effect becomes impossible to ignore. A generation of talent begins developing with one eye on opportunities elsewhere. Regions struggle to retain their stars. Supporters watch familiar names disappear. And the system gradually becomes more vulnerable. For Welsh rugby, this isn't a theoretical problem. It's a genuine concern. The talent pipeline continues producing quality players. But keeping those players has become increasingly difficult. That changes the entire discussion about rugby's migration patterns. Because the real question isn't who receives players. The real question is which systems can afford to keep them, and which systems cannot. Then we arrive at France, the financial giant of world club rugby. The top 14 is often described as the sport's richest domestic competition. Its clubs possess enormous resources. Its stadiums attract passionate crowds. Its contracts are among the most attractive in professional rugby. As a result, players from around the world dream of competing there. Yet even France challenges many of the assumptions people make. When discussions about imported talent begin, attention often turns immediately toward New Zealand or South Africa. But the reality is much broader. France has become a destination for players from rugby nations with far fewer financial resources. The league includes significant representation from Fiji, from Georgia, from Argentina, from Tonga, from Samoa. These nations produce extraordinary rugby talent. They develop world-class athletes. They contribute immensely to the sport's culture and quality. But financially, many operate in a completely different reality from France. That creates a powerful imbalance. When wealthy leagues recruit from developing rugby economies, the impact can be substantial. A single player leaving may not matter. A steady flow of elite talent over many years absolutely does. This is where world rugby faces one of its biggest long-term questions. How do smaller rugby nations remain competitive when richer leagues can offer opportunities they simply cannot match? It's a challenge that extends far beyond any one country. It's not just Wales. It's not just Fiji. It's not just Georgia. It's not just Argentina. It's a global issue affecting the structure of the sport itself. And perhaps that's why the focus on South Africa misses the bigger picture. The easiest stories are not always the most accurate. It's easy to blame a visible rugby powerhouse. It's easy to point at Springbok jerseys appearing in European competitions. It's easy to repeat familiar narratives. But numbers have a habit of exposing uncomfortable truths. And the truth here is fascinating. South Africa may be one of rugby's most misunderstood success stories. While critics accuse it of exporting players everywhere, the country continues retaining a remarkable amount of talent. While others discuss South African influence, entirely different talent movements receive far less attention. And while supporters argue about who is taking over which league, the deeper issue remains economic inequality across the rugby world. The future of the sport may depend on how that challenge is addressed. Can emerging rugby nations keep their best players? Can smaller unions remain competitive? Can the global game create a healthier balance between wealthy leagues and developing systems? Those questions will shape rugby for years to come. Because behind every transfer announcement lies a much bigger story. A story about money. A story about opportunity. A story about ambition. And ultimately, a story about the future of rugby itself. What do you think? Has South Africa been unfairly blamed for a problem that doesn't really exist? Or do you believe the Springbok influence on Northern Hemisphere rugby is still growing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of rugby's most debated topics, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more rugby stories, analysis, and breaking news from around the world. And remember, sometimes the most popular narrative is the furthest from the truth. Have you ever